Math prep for high school science. In the last video in the series, we learned how to express numbers in scientific notation. While that's somewhat useful to us for making extreme numbers more manageable, what is truly useful is being able to add, subtract, multiply, or divide those extremely large or small numbers. This video teaches us how to perform math calculations on numbers written in scientific notation. Before looking at addition and subtraction with scientific notation, remember how addition and subtraction work for regular numbers. To add or subtract, you must line the numbers up so that the same place values line up with each other. So thousands line up with thousands, tens line up with tens, hundredths line up with hundredths, etc. Adding and subtracting numbers written in scientific notation is very similar. Let's try this example. There are 4 steps to follow. First, get your exponents to match. You can choose which exponent to stick with. Personally, I usually pick to stick with the smaller exponent. In this case, that's 10 to the third. So 1.35 times 10 to the fifth becomes 135 times 10 to the third. This is the most complicated step, so let me break that down for you in case you're confused. You're starting with 1.35 times 10 to the fifth, the top line here. You know your goal is to write it as some number times 10 to the third. But you can't just change the exponent. That changes the value of the number and ruins everything. So we need to figure out how to write 10 to the fifth as 10 to the something times 10 to the third. We're changing the looks, not the value, so it's easier for us to work with. As you see in the third line, if we start with 5 tens multiplying each other, and we want 3 tens in one term, then the other term must have the other 2 tens. Finally, we want to combine the first 2 terms into one term. We have 1.35 times 10 to the second. Those 2 tens shift the decimal point over 2 places to the right. We get 135. So 1.35 times 10 to the fifth equals 135 times 10 to the third. Once you've made the exponents match in step 1, step 2 is to add or subtract the decimal terms. This is just basic addition like you learned in elementary school. Step 3 is to take your answer and pair it up with the exponent term again. Step 4 is to make adjustments, if necessary, to get into proper scientific notation. As you can see, we have 3 digits in front of the decimal point instead of 1. We need to shift that decimal point to the left 2 spaces. That's removing 2 powers of 10. We can't just get rid of those. That would change the value of our number. What we can do is give those 2 powers of 10 to the exponent term. So instead of 3 tens, we now have 5 tens. Our answer is 1.412 times 10 to the fifth. We're going to use the same 2 numbers to explore multiplication. For multiplication, we'll rely on the fact that order doesn't matter in multiplication. Just like if you have 3 ships with 2 sails each, or 2 ships with 3 sails each, you still have a total of 6 sails, because 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2, which is equal to 6. Returning to our problem, the first thing we'll do is get rid of the parentheses. They're unnecessary. I just threw them in there to make it easier to see the 2 numbers of scientific notation that we were multiplying. Now we're ready to start with step 1, group like terms. We're going to group the 2 decimal terms together and the 2 exponent terms together. Step 2 is multiply the 2 decimal terms. You can use a calculator if you're allowed to, but I wanted to have some fun, so I did it by hand. Next, consider the 2 exponent terms. 10 to the fifth is 5 tens multiplied by each other, while 10 to the third is 3 tens multiplied by each other. If you're multiplying 10 to the fifth by 10 to the third, that's a total of 8 tens multiplying each other. So step 3 is to add the exponents together. Step 4 is to adjust the decimal and exponent if needed. In this case, we already have exactly 1 digit before our decimal point, so we don't need to do any adjustments. We're done. Our answer is 8.37 times 10 to the 8th. For division of scientific notation, step 1 is to group like terms, but you need to be careful this time. Watch how to do this. If this is confusing, it might help to picture this math problem as a fraction. Let's start over. When you have the first term in scientific notation in the numerator of your fraction and the second term that you're dividing by in the denominator of the fraction, it might help you visualize how to group these terms together. You can split this fraction into 2 fractions, As you can see, the problem rearranges to a problem where the first decimal divides the second decimal term, and that's multiplied by the first exponent term divided by the second exponent term. After grouping the terms like this for step 1, step 2 is to divide the decimal terms. This time I'll just let you use your calculator to figure that one out. Step 3 is to subtract the exponents. Remember, 10 to the 5th is 5 tens multiplied by each other, while 10 to the 3rd is 3 tens multiplied by each other. If you're dividing 10 to the 5th by 10 to the 3rd, 3 of the 5 tens on the top, the numerator, will cancel with the 3 tens on the bottom, the denominator. That leaves 5 minus 3, which is 2 tens multiplying each other on the top. That's 10 to the 2nd. So step 3 is to subtract the exponents. Step 4, the final step, is to make sure you're back to proper scientific notation with the 1 digit, not 0, before the decimal point. In this case, all we have before the decimal point is a 0, so we need to shift the decimal point one place to the right. That's the same as multiplying by 10. Since the exponent term is 10 to the 2nd, there are 2 tens right there. We can take one of those to adjust the decimal term. Our final answer is 2.177 times 10 to the 1st. You can also just write 2.177 times 10. These 4 steps will guide you through doing basic arithmetic with numbers written in scientific notation.